Welcome to The Wing, the emotional and financial health check you never knew you needed. We provide tangible solutions for young women to build emotional health and wealth on their journey from school to motherhood. This is the podcast for young women in Australia navigating the big stuff: life, money, and motherhood. From high school to first homes, babies to bank accounts, we take you on an interactive listening journey that helps you make smart, empowered decisions every step of the way.
Hello, ladies. Welcome to another episode of The Wing. We have a returning guest, which is so exciting. We have Ashleigh Kuhn back on the call. Hello, Ash.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here again.
We are very happy to have you. We had a fantastic response from our last podcast together. So, ladies, if you haven't listened to it, please go and have a listen. Ash provided a lot of insight on nutrition and being a mum and some interesting fads that appear on Instagram that I'm sure you can all relate to. And we addressed quite a few topics that landed really well with our audience. To give you an idea, we had kind of triple the engagement that we would, or that that I would usually get if it's just me chatting away to my studio. So we thought it would be very worthwhile to get Ash back on and discuss some more topics. So thank you, Ash, for being with us again. We'll dive straight in, and we will be referring to the same Instagram post as we did last time, and just cover off on some more very juicy topics that Ash has got some perspective on. So, and also for you that don't know, Ash is a nutrition coach, and she is a mum, so she is very well versed in a number of these topics. So we're in a good place to start. So firstly, Ash, again, we're talking about the fads that we see on Instagram, or, we might be following certain pages that are sort of promoting certain things. And one I personally see a lot of, which I'm very curious to get your insights on, is being a high-performing woman. So tell me about that. What's your perspective? What are you seeing? And what message do you want to kind of address?
I'm really glad that you're saying this too, because I wondered if this was just like a bit of a me thing where it's like my feed, my algorithm. But I think that it's really interesting. It's something that I struggle with, because this idea of kind of being like a high-performing woman, there is definitely part of me that identifies with that. It's part of my, I think, personality, like a lot of us. And I think being goal-driven and having high standards for yourself is really awesome. But there is kind of this flip side, right, where if we're kind of forever trying to self-optimize, it kind of makes us feel maybe like we're not worthy just as we are. And I think when you bring being a mother into this high-performing woman equation, it becomes pretty complex, because we already have these really high expectations of ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I definitely feel them from society in terms of like being a high-performing mum. And I guess we have to think about, like, what does that mean to you? Like, when you hear being a high-performing woman, what do you think of?
Yeah, look, I think when I hear being a high-performing woman, I think, depending on the day, particularly at the moment during pregnancy, is a sense of overwhelm, a sense of underperformance, a sense of aspiration on a good day where I think, yep, that's exactly what I want to be. I want to be a high-performing woman, but then, kind of second guessing myself and being like, oh, I just don't know that that's for me right now. Whereas previously I might, associate being a high-performing woman with career, obviously, like a pretty standard topic on that particular thing, I guess. But now I'm like, okay, well, if I can get a jam-packed day in with the kids, for example, like, we're out for a morning play date or activity, and then we're back, and then their naps, they both have their before nap snack, and then they're in bed and they have a nap, and then I get to have a rest, and then they're up and we have a productive afternoon, and then we do bath time, and then they go to bed. And then at the end of the day, I think that felt like a high-performing day. But then if I zoom out, I'm like, oh, I just kind of did the do. I didn't really do anything extraordinary today. So I guess it just leads to that, that overthinking, and that goes back to that overwhelm.
Yeah, and like self-criticism, right? I'm hearing a lot of kind of that in what you're saying. And I think that is the problem, is that, to me, I think, well, okay, if I'm a high-performing woman, that means I'm a high performer in my career, in my fitness, in my marriage, in my parenting, in my aesthetics and how I present to the world. It's just like all of these categories. And it's just so wildly unachievable, right? And I think it's also probably important to acknowledge that you and I are having this conversation as two mums. You know, I know you have a fantastic supportive husband, so do I. We have, you know, great family and friends around us. So that we're, you know, there's definitely like a place of privilege. But even with that, we still feel this way, right? And I think that this is kind of part of the problem, is that it sort of feels like it puts a lot of responsibility on the woman, on the mum, to have like this self-discipline, this self-drive to do all of these things, just manage your time better, you know, all of these things, perform more. Whereas like it is dismissing a lot of these systemic issues that we have kind of to, you know, fight against, like things like affordable childcare, things like unequal division of labour in the house, which, you know, even with like my husband's wonderful, it's something we've really still had to work through because it just feels like naturally it falls to me as a woman. And I think that's really common. Even like gendered expectations of women at home, but at work, you know, when I returned to work from maternity leave, I had a really unsupportive workplace. And so there's all of these things that are kind of against you, where it's like, how can you be a high performer in that situation? And it's kind of putting almost the blame on us, which is wildly unfair. And I certainly don't have any women coming to me, like any clients, who don't have high enough standards for themselves. That's not the problem. If anything, the standards are too high, and then it kind of produces this like all or nothing thinking, which can be really destructive. Yeah, I guess that is a very long-winded answer to saying that I kind of think being a high performance woman is a bit of a scam. Like, it's a bit unrealistic.
Yes, and maybe it's a case of changing our language around it too. Maybe it's not high performance, like you said, has so many different, you know, connotations associated with it. And then maybe it's about just performance. Like, what is our performance in a certain day? Like our conversation kind of earlier, Ash and I had a monthly check-in for me on my nutrition plan, and talking about green light, yellow light, red light days, and then managing expectations of myself on those days, so that if I wake up and I'm, you know, in pain, or I haven't slept well, or something, the kids are sick, or, you know, had to shuffle work around for varying reasons, like whatever the thing is that kind of puts you into like maybe a red light day, then adjusting expectations around your performance that day that don't drag you down, but just kind of reassure you and reassure yourself compassion, so that you're not, you know, your expectations aren't having a green light day when you're really just, you're having a red light day. So you just need to have that day.
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of people don't recognize this, or even kind of identify that it's an option available to them to adjust their expectations, because, you know, so many of us do have really high expectations of ourselves, and in many ways that has served us for a really long time, especially sort of like pre-becoming a parent. I think that works quite well. Yeah, I think a lot of the time, if you set your expectation of yourself too high and you can't meet that, then you feel like a failure, when really it was all kind of geared against you to begin with. So we have it hard enough. Let's not make it harder for ourselves. And I think it's also kind of connected. It sort of sometimes feels like the next gen version of like Boss Babe.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Which kind of has
Yes.
like some toxic connotations as well. So it's like we can continually reframe this over time and call it something different, but the concept as a whole is kind of problematic.
Yes, I agree. Yes, because you hear that, yeah, being a boss babe or a boss bitch, or, you know, whatever it is. And oftentimes that's aligned with work, or, and that was another thing I thought of too, is that, you know, returning to work after having babies, and, you know, or women not wanting to lose their place in the workforce. So they maybe
Mm.
return sooner than what they would have liked to, because they don't want to become irrelevant or lose their spot, or not be in an unpaid situation for too long, because it obviously impacts things like your superannuation and whatnot later on. But maybe these titles that we're giving ourselves or giving others are actually completely unhelpful, and perhaps we should focus on expectations. Like, what are your
Yeah.
expectations rather than your performance?
Also, have you heard of like a high performing dad or like a boss man? Do
Ah!
you know what I mean? Like that's not so much of a thing, is it? Isn't that interesting? Like, yeah.
Totally. That, I like that you flip that on its head. I No, you don't. I would never say to Jay, "Oh God, you are such a boss man." Like, he'd probably be quite offended.
Yeah. I don't know. Isn't it weird that we just kind of feel this need to kind of like put women in these certain boxes, or
Yes.
when that expectation doesn't seem to be there for men so much?
Yes, totally. No, very interesting topic. Thank you, Ash. I liked your insights on that. Now we're going to get into a few other things. So let's talk about fasted cardio. Tell me about that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so when I actually vividly remember this, I used to work as a receptionist on the desk at a gym, and this PT told me that they'd gone to this educational seminar and they heard that fasted cardio was the single best thing you could do for women for fat loss. And I just internalized that and believed that to be true for such a long time. Like many things, I feel like, you probably picked up on social media, especially in that like 2016 kind of era of wellness, or like, Women's Health Mag or whatever it was. Whereas when you look at the evidence, basically that's not supported. So we know that like if you do some cardio on an empty stomach, your fat burn might be higher, right? But when we talk about fat burn and fat loss, they're different things. So basically, even though your fat burn might be higher, your overall fat loss isn't affected by whether you eat or not before your
Right.
cardio. So one is talking about using fat as a source of fuel in your exercise session, and the other is talking about kind of like a calorie equation and an overall, like we've talked about, like in order to lose fat, you have to be in a calorie deficit. And whether you do that in an exercise form that uses more fat as fuel or more carbs as fuel, that is ultimately what's going to get you there. So I guess the headline here is that there's nothing magical about fasted cardio. If you enjoy doing that, like if you don't like eating something before you train, that's fine. But we do know that having a little bit of simple carb before a workout is definitely going to help with performance. So if you're doing something lower intensity and you don't want to eat, not so worried about it. If you're doing like high intensity cardio, I would definitely recommend eating something that's going to make you perform better, probably feel better as well.
What's an example of something that might be good to get in before a workout in the morning?
I often recommend a couple of medjool dates because they're delicious and they're
Oh,
really like simple carbs for you to digest. But you can also have like a couple of jelly snakes and some water. It doesn't have to be,
really?
yeah, like those kind of things, which is actually like a more processed form of sugar, can be really good because it's easy for your body to digest and you can use it as fuel for exercise really quickly. So yeah, get into the medjool dates though. They're really good.
Yes, they are good. And I probably threw myself off them because I bought some and I ate a couple and I put them into my tracking app and I was like, whoa, there's quite a bit of, they're quite calorie dense. But
Yeah.
that, I was just sort of snacking away as a pregnant person does. But if I was more conscious about that intake, like, in it when I'm not pregnant, then, before I go for a walk, even though that's low intensity, or maybe I was doing more of a brisk walk on the treadmill or whatever it might be, then yeah, that's interesting to know that that is actually something useful to get in and at least maybe even settle your tummy before you get into a full workout.
Yeah, it's not going to feel heavy when you're exercising, which is, I think, one of the reasons why quite a few people, including myself, like that option.
Love it. Let's next talk about a carnivore diet. Tell me about that.
Basically, a carnivore diet is where you eat mostly animal products and very little else. I wouldn't recommend it for many reasons. You're not going to smell particularly good. You're probably not going to feel particularly good. It's not great for your digestion. It's a bit of a fad, and people have gone super hard in on this. It's often associated with like pretty high. You might also find it in the kind of keto land, so like really higher fat diet, less carbs. It's just not what I would recommend for a healthful diet. You kind of, as we have spoken about as a kind of client and coach, there's lots of nutrients in fruit and vegetables, and we also want to be getting a nice spread of different kind of fats. So you probably want to be avoiding getting lots of saturated fat from like fattier cuts of meat, getting more polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats from different plant sources. It's just going to be like a more healthful diet. So this one is a bit more sciencey, but the headline is don't do it. It's not great.
Yes, I thought the sound of a carnivore diet sounds very intense and doesn't sound overly balanced. And clearly being a fad, like where would you see this advice kind of coming up most? Like, is it something that you see or that clients come to you in a common way, or where is that
Yeah,
appearing?
funnily enough, I've seen it a lot on social, but I've also seen it a lot in office spaces when I was working in comms. Quite a few people I worked with, sort of broader place I worked, had tried this approach. It's very fat diety. You probably see it more, I think, unsurprisingly, there's probably more men that are attracted to this diet and maybe perpetuating it. But yeah, it's an interesting corner of the internet, the carnivore diet people.
So we can avoid that one. Okay, great. We're going to tick off
Yeah.
carnivore diet that's not in our fad list.
Mm.
Now, another fad, and you mentioned a couple of kind of specific diets and things, but the unnecessary exclusion of food groups. What do you mean by that? And can you highlight some of the food groups that people typically try and exclude and why?
Typically, it's going to be dairy and gluten. Obviously, gluten, I wouldn't say is a food group, but those are the kind of two things that people tend to avoid the most. I actually spoke about this on Instagram over the weekend because I saw this is a really good example of how this plays out actually on social media. I saw an influencer had gone on holidays and she went to Greece, and she said, I couldn't have like my plant-based milk in my coffee, so I had like normal cow's milk, and then I had this big breakout, and I've come back from my holiday and cut out dairy, and my skin has improved as a result. And I feel like there was a time when I would have heard that and been like, oh my God, her skin is amazing. Like, I'm going to cut out dairy. But when you think about actually what played out through that story, she's gone on holidays. So what do most people do when they go on holidays? They are probably in a different climate, might be more humid, hotter. They might be sweating more. They might be doing less exercise. They might be drinking more. Their diet's probably going to be a bit different. You're more likely to have like more indulgent foods because you're on holidays. Like, I hope you are, because that is one of the things that makes a good holiday. You might be less diligent with your skincare, for example. So there are so many different factors there that could impact this person's skin. And even then to say like, and I came back and I cut out dairy and my skin's cleared up. Well, again, you're going back into your normal environment. So you probably have more in your routine, eating healthier foods, your more normal diet, less alcohol, all of those things that we know can kind of contribute to good skin health. So, yeah, I feel like dairy is often really targeted as like something to cut out. I see it all the time from influencers. Whereas for most people, dairy is really good because we know that a lot of women struggle to have adequate protein in their diet, and dairy can be a great source of protein. It's also a really good source of calcium, and we know that's really important for women because bone health is an issue for women as we age. We're more likely to die as a result of a fall, for example. Having a good amount of calcium and also resistance training, strength training in the gym, two really, really good things we can do for bone health. That's just an example of, I guess, what would cause someone to cut out a food group, and then I guess the negative impact that could have on their health as a consequence.
Yes, and I think you hit the nail on the head there as well, is sort of generalizing based on someone we follow or someone that we find to be aspirational or someone that, post content that we genuinely like to engage with, what's right for them, or that they have kind of maybe self-diagnosed for them without looking more holistically or, situationally, is not necessarily something that we should follow. And that, these fads and these, I guess, things that come up on Instagram are they're just things, and it's not professional advice, and it's not something to necessarily have key takeaways from and implement into your life because so and so's doing this and they're not eating gluten anymore, so I'm not going to eat gluten anymore. Obviously, there's a whole category of people that fall into allergens, which is a totally different topic, but going down that road is a different process to just looking at something merely on social media and thinking, oh, I might do that because I think that's me. That anyone with a genuine allergy would have spoken to professionals in industry to learn, do proper allergy testing and follow that process, which would ultimately eliminate certain things if that's what showed up.
Yeah, and I would definitely encourage people to do that. Like if you suspect that you have an intolerance to something, absolutely investigate that. Go see your GP. You can do like particular elimination diets that can help you, make some connections between like trigger foods and GI symptoms or whatever the symptom is that you're experiencing. That's a really good thing to do because it can give you some clarity on what's happening in your body. Don't use social media as a diagnostic tool or a kind of information portal for potentially cutting out foods that are probably doing you quite a lot of good.
Great advice. We love that. Now, another topic. Oh, I've seen this. I'm so confused about this. Demonizing artificial sweeteners. Can you talk about this? And can you also tell us a bit more about like the Coke Zeros of the world? What's that connection? Tell us more about demonizing artificial sweeteners.
Yeah, honestly, total transparency, I have quite a lot of artificial sweeteners. I'm definitely, I don't want to say I'm pro artificial sweetener, but it's certainly a part of my diet. I think there's some things that are repeated so much in media or on social media that they become kind of fact. Whereas when we actually look at the evidence, it's telling a different story. And I think this is one of those things. So when we look at the evidence around the levels of artificial sweeteners that are like toxic or will cause harm, firstly, they're animal studies typically, and they're very, 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 very high levels that you wouldn't really hit. No normal person would have that much artificial sweetener in their diet. So they're quite a safe thing. And in fact, it's really interesting. There is a little bit of evidence. This is kind of something that is just generally true in research. So sometimes when you look at the evidence, you can make a statement, but it might actually not be reflective of what's happening because there are other things at play. So, for example, people that have artificial sweeteners tend to be more overweight or obese. That's because they're often trying to lose weight or make choices that reduce their overall calorie consumption. It's not a cause of the artificial sweetener, right? So artificial sweeteners can be actually quite a good tool because when we look at, say, for example, soft drink, we know that sugar-sweetened beverages are quite a big contributor to overweight and obesity across the world, especially in Western culture. They're not bringing much to the table in terms of nutrition. And having an artificially sweetened version is a way that you can reduce the amount of calories that you're getting from that, which obviously then can have a beneficial impact on someone's diet because we know just for a lot of people, especially those that are overweight or obese, just losing body fat has a lot of health benefits in terms of reducing the risk of chronic disease and that sort of thing. Basically, if you want a Diet Coke, have a Diet Coke. I support you. In fact, I'm quite the Diet Coke fan.
Yes, and that's what I mean. I keep hearing, like, well, if you're going to have sugar, just have the sugar. Like, the sugar is at least, it's not artificial. But again, it probably comes down to quantity and intake and what your overall diet looks like. I mean, if you're going to live off artificial sweeteners,
100%.
like you said, that's probably not the best idea.
No. And if you overdo it on artificial sweeteners, you'll probably have diarrhea.
Yeah.
That's probably the bigger concern, to be honest.
Completely upsetting your gut health.
Yeah. Yeah. But a little bit is not going to do you
Great.
Certainly not. Even a little bit every day.
And that probably leads into the next topic, which is diet culture. We did touch on this a little bit in our last podcast, but talk to us a bit about diet culture. What are you seeing? What are you like now? What's trending?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm probably a little bit out of the circle because, a lot of my algorithm and my social media following is probably more like evidence-based people. But I think some of what we've talked about, I know that there is a pretty big, skinny talk is kind of having this, I don't want to say resurgence. It's a resurgence of the idea, but I feel like the way that it has shown up on TikTok is kind of unique. But basically just like the glamorization of smaller bodies, I think is a really kind of simple way to put some of the most problematic aspects of it. It's, this assumption that you're worth more if you're smaller. I would say that's the biggest part of it, is kind of glorification of thinness at the expense often of health, because we know if we go into super restrictive diets, then, we have lots of women that are not getting the nutrients that we need. We see people losing their periods, which is not great. It's just not a helpful, I guess, narrative. And I think it's important to separate. You can have fat loss that is not necessarily tied up in diet culture. Like, there's nothing wrong with pursuing fat loss. Often that's quite healthy for people, but you need to do it in a healthy way and in a way where you're not pinning your entire value as a person on how small you can make your body.
Exactly. And also, like we touched on in the last podcast as well, was that we were talking about you're born with what you're born with, and a lot of it is genetics. So when us little shorty bums at 5 foot are trying to achieve things that a 6 foot supermodel have, that's just a complete unrealistic expectation, and working with what you've got is the most important thing, and obviously making sure that that's a healthy approach to your life and your body and your intake, rather than pinning yourself or comparing yourself to other people that are just simply not in your category.
Yeah, and the other thing, I love to see women who are strong and fit. I think we all do, and that's not compatible with this sort of skinny talk movement where you're constantly underfueled. Essentially, if you're avoiding getting bigger in any sense, you're missing out on like muscle gain, which is so beneficial for women, for anyone, but I would say especially for women. So yeah, and it's funny, I kind of have the other side of the coin. Like, you're a smaller woman, I'm quite a tall woman, but I see a lot of, these really like little petite gym gals, for example. Like, that's never going to be me, no matter how hard I try. Like, I'm always going to be a more muscular, larger framed woman. And like, I want to own that. It flies in the face of diet culture, but I kind of love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know what you mean. Like, even observing people around you, or things like that. Like, I think when I see someone living a like nutrient dense, fit, strong lifestyle, I think that is far more inspiring than watching someone push things around their plate. And perhaps there is a bit of a shift there. Maybe there is some, depending what you're looking at and what your algorithms are showing you, but maybe there's starting to be a little bit of a shift in that diet culture where we know that, skinny fat's not good, or, getting the right nutrients in is more admirable than, and knowing what those nutrients are and following a strength program for longevity, those types of things are valued more by more people as time goes on.
Yeah, I did hear someone say the other day on a podcast that they think weight training for women is going out of fashion, and it broke my heart because I think it's just such a good thing. I did a social post once about, if you want to see more women in the weights room, like, be a woman in the weights room. And I think that that is something that we all need to do, is like show off and own that space, because it can be intimidating, but it can also be, well, it is one of the healthiest things you can do for your body. So let's all rally against that and make it, make it popular, make it cool. I mean, it is cool, but you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Now, food shaming. I mean, my interpretation of food shaming is like, don't eat that donut, or I don't want to be seen eating a burger, or, I don't know, like, maybe that's very inward. What do you mean by food shaming? How is that becoming a fad, or what have you seen?
It can be that. So I think that's often what, like, our internalized food shaming. I think last time I was talking to you about how now I can go out with Freddie for a slice of cake, whereas I wouldn't have ever done that by myself, because I would have felt shame in that, which is really, when I look back, I feel really sad about that, because how good is cake? But I think also probably the way I see it play out more is people shaming other people for even eating healthy. So say, for example, like, you're having a work morning tea and you're not having the chocolate or the cake or whatever because maybe you don't want it. Maybe that's not in line with your current health goals. And people say, go on, have a slice. Like, life's too short, or like, you're being too strict, or just, to be honest, any kind of commentary about what you're eating or not eating, typically not helpful. Like, it's none of your business. Do you know what is a good example, actually? I can use it because it's me. The other day, my family was having pancakes, like my mum and my dad and me and Freddie and my husband. And I just wasn't hungry and I just didn't want them. So I was there, just with my coffee while everyone was having pancakes. And my dad was like, oh, that's a bit sad. And I was like, is it? I'm not hungry, so I'm not making myself eat this food I don't want. Like, why is that making you sad? Because I don't feel sad about that. It's just, it's really common. And it gets more common around like Christmas time, I think, is a really big time you see it. I think part of it is that people often, when you're in that kind of, particularly in an office setting, but when you're in a setting with other people, we can kind of project our feelings and thoughts onto other people. So sometimes people see your choices as a reflection or a judgment of their choices. Then in reality, we know that's not the case. But for example, if you're not eating pizza at the work lunch, they then feel bad for eating pizza.
Totally. Yes, I've definitely been in those situations myself, probably on both sides of the fence actually, where not so much now, but like watching certain colleagues, like they have their own pre-made lunches, and then it would be like teamwork lunch day. And as you said, they're ordering a bunch of pizzas or this or that, and you can't help but look over at the healthy meal and be like, oh, I probably should be eating that, but I'm not. I'm going to have this pizza instead. And then it's a case of whether you verbalize that and make that comment onto the person who's clearly trying to go on on a health journey that's none of your business, so you shouldn't comment. Yeah, or being on the receiving end of it, like where you just, like you said, you just wanted to have your coffee that morning and you just didn't feel like pancakes, and there's nothing sad about it. It's just how you felt that day. But
Yeah.
having that commentary on, yeah, it's definitely a projection on the food shaming side of things. I can see that, and maybe being more conscious of people's choices as well. Like for example, I've got a friend who competes in bodybuilding, and she is very clear about she's very specific. She's won a ton of awards for how diligent she's been, but she'll often be prepping over that Christmas period, and now I just know that like she's always, don't cater for me, like I've got my own meal and everything, and over time I've watched her do that. I think good on, like, her self-restraint first of all is incredible, and like, being able to support her on that journey is more important than commenting on, oh, go on, just have a sausage, or go on, just have a drink or whatever. Like, now that she's sort of consistently had that behavior, everyone around her can sort of, well, that's her, and that's her mission, and we know the results she's getting, so there's no point commenting on it, because it's just counterproductive for everybody.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a respect thing.
Yeah.
Like I respect you and the choices you're making for your body. You're an adult. You probably know what you're doing. I think sometimes it does come from like a place of care and of love. So like, often you'll find it from like mums or a kind of older colleague who's looking out for you or concerned about you, especially if you're pursuing fat loss, because I think sometimes, again, they're like, oh my gosh, if you're pursuing fat loss, you must feel really awful about your body, and maybe you're being really over restrictive, and like, hopefully that's not the case. If you're pursuing fat loss, you're doing it in a healthful way. So that kind of commentary, it's not helpful and it's kind of disrespectful.
Yes, absolutely. Nice reminder. I'm very glad we touched on that, because I was looking at that through a different lens. That's a good one.
But also don't shame yourself for eating delicious food, because you are allowed to eat delicious food. And food doesn't have moral value. So, yeah.
Oh, that's a headline of that one. Food does not have moral value. Love it. This is a bit of a curveball one, but I'm so curious. So, Fad, again, medical misogyny, or any misogyny really, in brackets. Tell us about that, Ash.
So we know that medical misogyny is very much a real documented thing in Australia, internationally. Women are less likely to be prescribed pain medication. Oh, I could talk for hours about this. Fires me up. It's personal to me for two reasons. One is because I have endometriosis, and like many women, it took me a very long time to get a diagnosis, and that diagnosis would have been quite helpful much earlier on. Like a lot of women, I found out, well, I guess I sort of started my diagnosis period because I had struggles with fertility, which in itself is kind of a bit misogynist, isn't it? Like it wasn't until I was birthing a baby that my reproductive value was such to get that kind of focus. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I was just told like having a painful period is part of being a woman, suck it up, have some Panadol. So there's that. I've also seen it play out in a different way, not nutrition related, but it's made me really passionate about it. So bit of a vulnerable moment, but I have hyperhidrosis, which is where you like sweat more than is normal or like appropriate to the climate and that sort of thing. I have it under my arms. So I've had it since I was a teenager, and I distinctly remember when I was in my early 20s, I went to a doctor, I told her about it, and she was like, oh, typically we don't give treatment. Like we'd give treatment to like a businessman in a suit, for example, who's like sweating through his suit or has to like shake lots of hands in business deals. Like then we'd give them treatment. But for you, and I went in there being like, it's impacting what I wear, it's impacting my self-esteem, it's impacting my, everything. And it has for a long time. I think I had it in like year 7 was when it kicked in for me. And it wasn't until after I had my son we're talking the last few years, he's 3. I went to this really great GP. Oh, and I should say as well, the GP who I originally went to, who told me I wasn't a man in a suit, was a young woman. So it's not
Wow.
like it's just coming from men. There's some internalized misogyny happening here. Went to a great GP. I now take a medication every day that completely fixed it. It's changed my life. So yeah, pretty passionate about medical misogyny, not necessarily a nutrition topic, but I think just with anything in women's health, like it's just so sad to see it play out and be so common for so many women.
That is wild. So then what's the diagnosis after that initial GP encounter was, okay, well, if I start wearing more suits and shaking more hands, are you going to treat me then?
Right. And it's really frustrating because for a long time I was paying for Botox under my arms to help, but that is expensive. It only lasts for like a short period of time. If I'd had the diagnosis, there's actually a Medicare, I think, rebate you get for that procedure, but I wasn't entitled to that because I couldn't get a diagnosis. So it's just really unfair. Whereas if I had presented as a businessman, a sweaty businessman, I would have walked out of there with my script or my referral. So yeah, it's pretty shit.
That's insane. And I'm hearing this more and more. Women, friends, colleagues, women in quite a lot of pain around their periods and maybe even not around their periods, just when related to different conditions that it's just overlooked. Like I had a conversation with a friend on the weekend who has been trying to get diagnosed with whatever is going on around her painful periods. She's already got 2 kids, so, and they're wanting to have another. And because the fertility side of things had slowed down a little bit, they obviously did a deeper dive and went to look and find out more. And I said, what's happening on the side of things for pain management? And she said they've just encouraged me to keep taking Panadol and Nurofen in the lead up to. And I thought, well, yeah, but surely there are other remedies. And then I kind of went on I did ask her permission before. I said, look, I've got some pain management that I use in pregnancy that I never knew it was available to me. And if I had known this, the first time I was pregnant, then things maybe would have been different. But I don't know what it is about that restriction on how to manage the pain and not be dismissed. And I remember after having C-section with our son, I was getting a lot of after pain, which I'm sure a lot of women experience, no matter how you deliver. And I actually got flagged for drug-seeking behaviour because I could not access my pain management. This is maybe a matter of weeks after having him. And the only reason I found out I got flagged for drug seeking behavior because of a friend of ours is a pharmacist, and he's like, Katey, we've had to put this on your packet of the pain management because I'd gotten a script. I got a script from the hospital. I got a script from my obstetrician, and I think I'd maybe gone back and asked for repeats because I'd run out. And so I got flagged for drug seeking behaviour weeks after I'd had a C-section, and a couple of hospital visits during return hospital visits in that time as well. So, and my follow up conversations with one of the male GPs, again, I said I don't usually see him, but I got in with a telehealth, and he was saying, have you tried a heat pack and have you tried Panadol and Nurofen? You just got to space them out, read the back of the box on the hours that you take. I was like, oh my God, this is making me so angry. How is this your advice? I don't expect you to understand the pain level, but I need you to understand from a medical professional to a patient that I'm telling you because I need the support, and not getting it is just so frustrating. So I can
Infuriating.
Yeah, infuriating. I can completely relate to what was said to you about the men in suits and the shaking hands. I just can't even.
It just sums up so well.
Oh, yeah.
It just really presents. I think of the fact that it was a young woman doctor. I think to me, because you sort of expect if you go to see a woman, she's gonna, I don't know, empathize, understand, and it's not necessarily the case. It's so frustrating, but it definitely highlights the importance of if you're a woman, if you're having trouble, get a second opinion. Go see a different GP. You shouldn't have to. It's unfair that we have to do that extra labour, but if it means you get taken seriously and you find someone, who will listen to you. I remember this GP said to me, because I was like, oh my God, what? Thank you so much. And she was like, well, you're a grown woman and you're telling me your symptoms, and I, as your GP, are listening to you and giving you the available treatment options.
Yeah.
I'm not doing you a favour.
I'm doing my job.
That's how it works. And I was like, That's how it should work, shouldn't it? But doesn't necessarily play out that way.
No, that's it. But that's good advice too. A second opinion, to talk to friends and do some different research. And while it is annoying that we do have to do that additional labor and waiting for appointment times or trying to get in on a new wait list and things like that. But look, it can be really worthwhile because, then you're going to just have access to the treatment. Then, having said that, during this pregnancy, I've got a new obstetrician this time who is fantastic, also a male. But I said, look, I just really need this pain management, like for different things during pregnancy. Is it appropriate? And he's absolutely. He wrote me a script, got for 3 repeats of the same drug that I got flagged for drug seeking behavior on after I'd had the baby. So
you don't really fit the profile of a, drug seeking individual to me.
Well, apparently I do.
Whatever.
So, that happened. All right, let's talk about perpetual mum guilt. We hear this often, and I hear it's in like the daily lingo of a lot of friends I speak with. It's sort of like, oh, mum guilt, does have mum guilt around this? Or I say it to myself all the time. What are you seeing, Ash, around mum guilt?
I actually had this conversation with one of my friends this morning because she was, she's had an injury and so she's had to go to the gym more, and she was saying like she feels guilty having time away from the kids. And, I think we need to kind of sometimes flip that on its head and think, isn't it great that my kids are seeing their mum take care of herself, prioritise her own well-being? It's something that I've spent a lot of time talking to my husband about. He's very much like, he calls it mum not being on the bottom of the totem pole, like, making sure that we're all kind of equals in the family and everyone's needs get looked after. And that means dad goes to the gym, mum goes to the gym, dad goes to golf or whatever, mum gets to hang out with her friends. And I just think I feel like I'm forever talking I'm not coming into this conversation at all saying I don't have mum guilt, talking myself out of that. It's like very much an ongoing thing. But even stuff like, sending Freddie to daycare, I think particularly at the moment with what's in the media, I think sometimes you can feel really guilty about things like that. I remember when I was going back to work, I did as you do, when I was up for a feed at night, Googling what's the best age to send your kid back to daycare. And God, it was school age. School age is the best age for them to go back to work, that sort of thing. And I was like, oh my God, I'm awful. The fact that I'm not just staying at home and looking after my kids, even though that wasn't what I wanted to do. I think we just need to reframe things all the time. So for me, I love spending time with Freddie. And when he's at home, I put in a big effort to be present and mindful. But those people at his daycare are professionally trained to look after his development and, stimulate him throughout the day. I'm not. And so it's kind of reframing that as in aren't I lucky that I have a place that I can send Freddie to where a professional looks after his development and makes sure that his social needs and everything are met, and I can do my work. And then when we reconnect, we can have quality time together.
Absolutely. This is such a hot topic. So we have definitely experienced some kind of, I guess, downward pressure on daycare that in my day, we, kids were kept at home until school age. And, that's like the expectation that's kind of been put on to us. And so I just sort of accepted that and thought, oh, okay, that's just what I'll do. Meanwhile, absolutely falling apart here in the background. I think I did full-time stay-at-home mumming for nearly 2 years. So, which overlapped the birth of obviously our daughter, but then following our son, he was about 10 months old when I decided I need to do something else here. I've got to go back to work. I'm only working 15 hours a week at Dashdot, and obviously from home. So it's a pretty, bite-sized chunk that I'm able to manage each week. But daycare still kind of being off the cards. But Jake and I had a conversation recently. We're like, why is it off the cards? Like, what? It's not off our cards. I don't have the skill set to be at home with 2 little people 7 days a week and make sure they're mentally stimulated and getting all of the things that they need. And I am not a toddler, so they're not getting that socialization from me, all of these things. And obviously speaking with people with friends that have kids in daycare and all the benefits that come with that, obviously getting them ready for their school life and the social interaction with other little people their age, and and being under the supervision of educators that are, qualified and skilled to nourish and kind of help them thrive in their early learning, how important all of that is. So Jake and I then made a decision. We're like, right, we're going to send our daughter to daycare, and she's going to go a couple of days a week. And I remember testing the waters. Like I was telling, like, because we've had this pressure of no daycare, like as a generational gap kind of information, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. And I would be telling a few friends, like, I was thinking about sending her to daycare for a couple of days next week. And every single person I spoke to was like, oh, that's a great idea. Oh, which one are you going to send her to? And just like no judgment was coming back at me. And I was like, oh, okay, it's okay. It's okay to send her, kind of thing. Like I'd been feeling so guilty about sending her. Like, is this the right thing? And then ended up sort of having more conversations with family around it. And they could, had a couple of reactions, but definitely not as bad as I thought. But Jake and I just keep like coming back to ourselves and like, why do we have this guilt? Like, why do we have this, that we owe it to like, these are our kids and we are to make the decisions for them and not feel guilty about it. And if that,
And for you.
yeah, absolutely. Like so that we can show up and be better parents, and that we, are not having that mum guilt or dad guilt or parent guilt that, we are or are not doing the right thing, like trying to listen to your gut and your instincts about what's right for your child. If you feel like your child needs to be at home for longer, then do that. If you feel like your child needs to be out in the world, then do that. But yeah, coming back to that guilty conscious or guilty thinking is, it's innate, but it doesn't help when there are external pressures that are kind of putting you in that box of guilt, whatever it may be.
Yeah, you're so spot on. I even felt bad. I felt so guilty when Freddie was little with like leaving him with my parents or my mother and father-in-law. And it was totally from me. It wasn't that they were making me feel guilty necessarily. I really had to like sort of put that under a microscope for myself and be like, why am I feeling guilty? Because realistically, I know that it's important for them to spend time without me there, to have like a really good quality relationship between them. I had a conversation with my mum and I was like, I've got to be honest, I'm having to reframe this in my head. Like, yes, I'm grateful for your support, but you're not necessarily doing me a favor because you also get to spend time with your grandson, which is really important for you and for him. And so, yeah, I think just like really thinking about like, why am I feeling this guilt? Is that fair? And is it reflective of what's actually happening? And it kind of like, again, if you can have in the back of your mind what we discussed earlier in terms of like that systemic failure for mothers, where like really there's not adequate support, even if you're someone who has a supportive family and the means to pay for daycare and that sort of thing. Like there's a lot it's a bit of an uphill battle for you in terms of like the expectations and the load that you carry. So, how can you reframe it into a way that's helpful? And, to your point as well, like even if you weren't back at work and you decided it was better to have your daughter in daycare for a day because you needed to lighten that load for you, ultimately that is going to make you a happier person and that's going to be better for her.
Exactly right. Yes, doing that way up and trying to, and I think it helped as well, like you said, like in reframing it for yourself and maybe leaning on information gathering, perhaps. Like if you feel like you're being backed into a corner that's generating guilt for you, then speaking with other people that are in a situation that you're thinking about entering into, like learning more from them and, or leaning on resources, or maybe it is calling up daycare and having a conversation with them or doing a tour and, actually going and exploring these. And obviously daycare is just one example of where guilt can come from either way there. But yeah, information gathering and having conversations with people that are in the same boat as you, because, that they're likely experiencing the same things. And then maybe having those conversations can help you reframe, the way you're thinking about certain situations.
Yeah. And I also think there's two questions that are really helpful to ask yourself. And it's, is this true and is it helpful?
Great.
Because if you're having thoughts that are not like, I'm a terrible mother because I put my son in daycare, it's like, is that true? No, it's not true. And is it helpful? Absolutely not. It kind of helps you like move away from those sort of thoughts that are actually exacerbating the problems or the overwhelm or the stress that you're feeling, and towards maybe like creating a more helpful narrative for yourself.
Great advice. I love that. I feel like we'll need to write that on our bathroom mirrors because,
Yes.
or have it written down in a notepad next to bed when you wake up at 2 a.m. with insomnia and you're questioning everything you've ever done in your whole entire life.
We all do that, Stephanie. We really do.
natural human way.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. That's fantastic advice, Ash. Thank you. We've got 2 more topics. So, creatine, gummies, and cheat days.
Creatine gummies, look, creatine monohydrate is a very, very well-researched, excellent supplement to take. It's got performance benefits, muscle gain benefits, there's some cognitive benefits in terms of memory, cognitive performance, that sort of thing. Take it. But don't take it in gummy form because, my opinion, one, it's a very expensive way to take creatine. So typically, like the way that we get it is we just get creatine monohydrate powder. You have 3 to 5 grams a day. I mix mine in with like sugar-free cordial and water. Just drink it. If you're having gummies, it's very expensive. And when you think about like in the research, often it's cited like 3 to 5 grams of creatine is kind of an effective dose. Often when we're talking about the cognitive benefits, we're leaning more towards 5 grams a day. When you think of the weight of a gummy, it's probably going to weigh a couple of grams, right? And some of that will be creatine. Some of it will be whatever makes the gummy into its gummy shape, whatever flavors it to make it palatable, because creatine doesn't taste nice by itself. There's no sugar coating that. The color. So only a small portion of that gummy is going to be creatine. So to kind of get to that effective dose, you're probably going to need to take upwards of like 3 to 5 gummies a day. That starts to get very expensive. But the other thing is there's a fair bit of research or lab tests that they've done. And, I can't speak to like specific brands because brands have different integrity or, it might be like a manufacturing issue. But basically, often there's less creatine in the gummy product than what is advertised on the packet. As, I don't know, research gets better or that sort of thing, it might improve. But at the moment, I think it's just not the most effective way. And sure, like if you want to waste some money on creatine gummies, that's up to you. But there are definitely better ways that you could spend your money that are going to benefit your health.
And sorry if I missed this, Ash, but the reason someone would take creatine, can you go into that?
It has lots of benefits for performance. So it can help like short bursts of performance in terms of like what you're doing in the gym, like high intensity exercise or that sort of thing. But it can also help with like muscle development and growing and maintaining lean body mass, which as we've talked about is really, really important for your health. And then there's also some cognitive benefits, memory, mental clarity, mental like cognitive performance, so completing tasks and that sort of thing. So it's like a very good, I recommend it to pretty much every client I work with because, as I said, it's one of, if not the most well-researched supplements out there.
Amazing. And that's interesting about gummies too. I do always wonder that. I think the time and effort that it would take production companies or manufacturers or whatever to actually create cute little palatable lollies versus just, having it in its purest form with some water or, as it's part of a shake or however else you're going to have it, the cost benefit is, probably vastly different. And there's, looking at other ways that you can get good stuff in without it, costing a fortune.
Yeah, and look, supplements can be great, and especially evidence-based supplements, but something that to be conscious of is that once you change the form of the way that you're getting that supplement, sometimes the bioavailability of it or how easily your body can digest and process that changes. Typically, like a powder or a pill are typically the most well-researched ways to take supplements, depending on what the supplement is, but that's probably your safest bet in terms of making sure that you're taking the most efficacious form of whatever you're taking.
Makes sense. And now finally, Ash, cheat days. What's a cheat day? Why would you have one? And what's your opinion? I can kind of get a little bit of your opinion there.
It's kind of like, okay, I guess a cheat day is, if you're on a diet, you might be strict or on the diet or whatever the case may be for like 6 days a week. And then you might have a cheat day or a cheat meal where you just kind of eat whatever you want. I don't like these for a few different reasons. One is like the verbiage of the language around it, like a cheat day. Like that's not conducive to a healthy relationship with food. Like we said earlier, food doesn't have moral value. So having 6 good days and 1 bad day is not great from the way that the connections that you make with health. We want you to have a good relationship with food, which means that you can eat different types of food and not feel guilty about it. Eat a healthful diet that has some more indulgent foods and still feel okay about yourself and your diet and know that you are, being healthy and all of that sort of thing. So the other way it can be problematic is because it is actually incredibly easy if you are in a calorie deficit to lose fat 6 days a week and you have one day of eating whatever you like, you can absolutely put yourself not into just maintenance, so topping up to where you would maintain your body weight, but you can even go into surplus pretty easily, especially if you have deprived yourself of any food that you like to eat for 6 days in a row and then you just like let loose on, I don't know, KFC or Messina or any of the delicious things that people associate with cheat days. So from that point of view, it's also not helpful. There's basically nothing helpful about it. I would say if you want to eat more indulgent food, plan that into your week, make it normal. It's fine. It doesn't have to be cheating.
What about with like a cheat meal? Or is it again, it's just around that language? It's like, no, it's not a cheat meal. It's like, how do we reframe that and that thinking?
Well, I guess like if you think about someone who cheats, what do you think about that person?
Yeah, exactly. You think,
They might be like lazy, they might be a bad person, they might be dishonest. Those are not good qualities, are they?
no.
And so you don't want to make that association with someone who eats pizza, because someone who eats pizza is not. That doesn't say anything about the type of person that they are, or about who they are as a person, or their behavior, or the type of life that they lead, you know? Like, I eat a very, very healthy diet and I love eating pizza. So I think if you can, it's really not, it's kind of like the clean eating thing. Like, that's kind of assigning moral value to, you know, like if you eat clean foods, you're a, I don't know, a clean, more worthy, more successful person. Like, it's just not true. Food is food. That's it.
Yeah.
So I think if you want to plan in, here's a good way to think of it. So say a common occurrence is if I'm working with someone who is in, it doesn't really matter what their goal is in terms of body composition. Often people will want to have a date night with their partner once a week, once a fortnight, whatever the case may be. That doesn't need to be a cheap meal. What I would say is try to make it a really mindful meal where you're focusing on enjoying your food, where you're focusing on other elements of the experience, not just the food. So having a really bonding experience with your partner, listening to what they're saying, enjoying that time together, really enjoying the flavor and textures of your food, thinking like, how hungry am I right now? Do I need to keep eating? Do I want to keep eating? Am I heading towards uncomfortably full? That's going to be better for your digestion, for how you feel of yourself. But those things are true for most of the food we eat, right? So the more sort of inclusive we can be in terms of the way that we think about a healthy diet, yes, we know that if you overdo it on more indulgent or calorie dense food, you're probably not going to be having a very healthful diet. But it can absolutely be part of a healthful diet in moderation. And that's kind of closer to the way that we want to be thinking about it in terms of like an optimal mental health, self-esteem, relationship with food viewpoint.
Yes, absolutely. And as you said, it's what are the connotations we associate with those different words, and that food has no moral value. I love that. We could talk about, its nutritional value rather than its moral value, because moral value is not something that can be measured, but nutritional value is something that can be measured. And that's what we should be, it's mindful eating, not slapping a negative label on it and calling it that.
But also, I think we need to look at food as more than nutrition as well sometimes. Food is connection, food is experience, food is culture. One way that this really comes into play with a lot of my clients is we talk about emotional eating. Some degree of emotional eating is normal and probably appropriate. Like, you think that it works quite well. So say you're feeling like quite stressed or quite down, and maybe you have, I don't know, like for me, it might be like an almond croissant. And I eat that to kind of make myself feel better and soothe some of those feelings. It works a lot of the time, right? But it just becomes like, we want to have that as a tool in our toolkit for emotional regulation, because that's a normal part of a relationship with food. We don't want to have it as excessive, because then it can cause issues with your health goals, with your overall health, right? So it's about moderating it with other coping mechanisms. So again, it's kind of just like, we don't want to go too far down the like food as fuel. We also don't want to go down the food is the only source of enjoyment or pleasure that I have in my life. We kind of want to be in a nice, healthy middle ground.
Yes, that's great advice, because, these fads and these things that we see that pop up can often throw our thinking and, send us into one extreme or another. And yeah, it's just, it can be really unhelpful. So these are really nice reminders, I think. And coming from you, Ash, you're a nutrition coach. This is what you live and breathe, and you have this thorough understanding of it, and you see all of these things. They're not just fads, but these are also conversations that I imagine you're having with clients that are coming to you and, flagging these things with you. I actually remember me saying to you, Jake was away a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I was doing my weekly after action report, and I think I said in there, I hope to not, this week my goal is to not emotionally eat too much while Jake is away. And like, even just now realizing that was something that I flagged, that I thought, oh, this is a risk for this week. I didn't end up doing it. I did eat quite well that week, but it was, just that language around it and that negative connotation, like, oh, my support blanket's not going to be here, so I'm going to find support in something else that I maybe shouldn't.
But I love that. I love that you have that like self-awareness and kind of awareness of your behavior and routines, where you can identify that might be a problem, and you might do it sometimes, but have some other things built in to kind of support you through that period is really important.
Exactly. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. I absolutely love that we went into more detail on those topics. So thank you, Ash, for all of your insights. And just in case anybody listening to this episode didn't listen to the last one, I highly recommend you go back and have a little listen to that and listen to Ash share her knowledge and skills, for you to take in and go on your own journey. But Ash, I will give the mic to you again to just do a wrap up and tell us about your business and where we can find you. And if anybody is thinking about engaging with a nutrition coach like yourself, how would they go about that?
Yeah, cool. So the best place to find me is probably on Instagram, Nutrition by Ashleigh. I try to give out lots of, I would like to think, high quality, free information for people, recipes, that sort of thing. But I work with people one-on-one. I work with women. I love working with mums, but I also work with women who are not mothers on a range of different, I work with people on fat loss, pregnancy, postpartum, premenopause, menopause, all of that. Lots of different clients with different health goals. And I think for me, I love talking to women exactly about the things we've covered today, like relationship with food, self-esteem, like often women, exercising some self-compassion with their food and exercise, but also, taking the kind of like effective route towards their goals rather than being confused by some of these fads or oversimplifications of these things. It can be very confusing. So sorry, our business is called No Nonsense Nutrition and Fitness. So you can absolutely visit our website. But yes, probably Instagram is the easiest place to find me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ash. And yes, we will have Ash as a recurring guest because we're getting such fantastic feedback, and clearly the content is landing and it's certainly helping a lot of people. So if we can broadcast that as often as possible on this platform, then we absolutely will. But for now, thank you all for listening. And if you have any questions or anything you want to hear about from Ash, please send me a message on Instagram as well, the Wing Podcast AU, and we will catch you again soon. Thanks, ladies. Bye-bye.
Enjoyed the episode? Hit follow and check out _wingpod Oz on Instagram for a dose of wisdom getting you on the right path to success.